Well, let's start. Very good morning, dear colleagues. Today we have the Chatham House research presentation. Those who did not rename their name in Zoom, please, when opportunity arises, make sure that you change appropriately your name. If you want to ask a question after the host is completed with presentation, either raise your hand or send a question via chat. We have 1 hour. We have our speaker, who is director of Belarusian Initiative, Chatham House, Rihor Astapenia. Very good morning, Rihor. Very good morning. As well, I'd like to remind you that simultaneous we have online, we have English simultaneous interpretation. So if you find it more appropriate or more convenient to use English, you just go to English. If you choose Russian, then you will hear stuff in English, you will see everything in English. So that's it for the part. So Rihor, the floor is yours. Let's. Very good morning. Thank you very much indeed, Anton. Thanks for the opportunity to take the floor. Indeed, I'm Rihor Astapenia. I'm director of the Belarusian Initiative Chatham House, which is a popular name of the Institute of International Affairs in Britain. As well, I am director of Scientific Ideas. It's an organization that used to be registered in Belarus. Unfortunately, we have been deregistered. As I mentioned, we are going to use approximately 1 hour, of which about 30 to 45 minutes I would steal, because I have 70 slides to show. I would do my best to speak as quick as possible. So probably the interpreter would be able to cope with me. If the interpreter would say, go slower, I would do so. Seriously, I've got quite a lot of, it's a fifth research that I've been conducting in Belarus. So used to be in late June, early August. So therefore our selection or sampling corresponds to city or say town, urban population based on education, based on the locations that the person lives. So, and I have to remind you that this stuff we're doing, we are making online research. So we are asking only urban citizens. Accordingly, it arises that unfortunately we have the focus on those who are supporting the protest. It's possible, not necessarily it's 100%, but we have to be open and repeat so that the people understand it. Finally, I'm going to show you, I would start my presentation. Hang on a second, please. Now, sharing my screen. I hope that you see it properly. So therefore we may switch. So probably about the methodology that I have been using. We have been transparent in our research. So, and we have been publishing respondents, SAP. So for those who deal with data, for those who would be able to check that the survey was carried out appropriately. So quite unique practice. Not everyone is doing so. The Chatham House is going to publish it next week, early next week, so that those who have joined the uneasy morning to join the conference dedicated to the Chatham House presentation, so you have a unique opportunity to get to know this first. Well, now let's stick to the preferences in terms of elections. Well, quite regular, quite ordinary, nothing special, no serious change have been noted from the previous times. Naturally, Alexander Lukashenko is the best person. Then we see that a large group of people that represent democratic movement, and then we have the group representing the existing regime, which is an important element we need to understand. So that's the representative of the authorities' power. Known to the same extent that people are supporting the protest. So for those 27 years supporting the current regime, many of them, many people that know who Vladimir Makey, Yuri Karayev are. Changes, we have two changes. Oleg Gaidukevich, who have been more familiar to Belarusian society after approximately, or probably has taken place, the attack on his house has taken place. So therefore, he became more known. So Roman Golovchenko probably is less known than him, which is prime minister of the country. So that the Roman Golovchenko has an increase of 7%, whereas Oleg Edukevich 10. Then we have been asking people who, in their view, would be a decent president of Belarus. Viktor Babarika remains the most popular, so he deserves to be almost at the level of Lukashenko, 5% higher. And also a lot of other representative of democratic movement which are having quite significant ratings. So if, for example, we have 28 rating that have been consolidated, in this respect, democratic movement representatives has a split by individuals. In addition to Babarika, we have Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, Pavel Latushko. So therefore, they would have received 10% votes appropriately. Compared to the previous research, we may say that more support is offered to Svetlana Tikhanovskaya than Pavel Latushko. The same question, quite long one. They give the list to people, and quite often there was an answer: no one, nobody. So of quite a long list of people, so that probably evidences more than about apathy and lack of desire of people to take part in the politics. Then we ask questions. So of the list of people, choose that you would not like to vote at presidential elections in no way, in any way. So that we see that Alexander Lukashenko is taking first place, which is important, that probably at this particular research that Viktor Babarika shows quite small anti-rating. So Belarusian society has nothing against him, basically speaking, and then differs him from the other representatives supporting the protest movement. Then, this time we wanted to conduct an experiment. Say, imagine who would be in the second tour of presidential elections. The following candidates are offered, who you would vote for. This slide shows you, so Viktor Babarika and Pavel Latushko would have received chances if the second tour of presidential elections, they would have chances, Babarika 2-1, for example, which shows that both politicians have quite significant support and are perceived as possible contenders for the presidency in Belarus. Then we ask question, so of the listed people you trust or do not trust? So you could see a lot of people do not trust the existing regime and his representatives. So probably we are not going to spend a lot of time. We'll be coming back to this issue from time to time during our press conference. You see the growth of those difficult to say, I'm not sure. And this is because people that they used to say they do not trust the people at power. So at the example of Lukashenko, you could see that in January, people were saying that they're not sure, 12%. Now the figure grows, and it grows due to the fact that the number of people is going down who said they do not trust. Then the same question about trust or no trust to people who support the protest movement. You could see here that when people look at this slide, it's important to understand that we speak about specific particular individuals, that if in case the respondent is aware or knows this person. So the well-known is Maxim Znak, because he is known better to people who support the protest movement and who are aware of him. This is index of trust. So this is the difference between trust and no trust based on the people who know these politicians or that politicians. So we do not consider Sergei Rumas as a person from the authorities, from those at power, but we see -7%, probably appropriate ratio between trust and no trust. From the other hand, we see Maxim Znak, Maxim Bagritsov. Mostly these are the people who are known to those supporting the protest. Therefore, these people have quite high ratings. in terms of trust and no trust. Now we're switching to the state institutions. When I say state institutions, traditionally, people do not trust. So Belarusians do not trust these institutions. So anti-ratings on lack of trust are given to Central Election Committee, which is a tradition. State media, or state-controlled media, which is also a tradition, and state trade unions, state-controlled trade unions, which is a tradition. So these three. On top, the institution they trust most is the armed forces. 1/3 of the urban citizens trust, which is a unique phenomenon. So used to be enjoying more trust compared to other listed organizations and institutions. At least the armed forces are trusted more compared to other state institutions. The very fact, only 1/3 of urban citizens is trusting the armed forces is a unique fact. The same type of questions was posed on the institutions that are independent. Here you could see on the top, independent mass media and independent organizations campaigning for human rights. So that 33 and 37 accordingly urban citizens trust. Politically structured, the Babariko staff is better positioned, party together. So that Orthodox Church and Catholic Church enjoy trust. Russian Orthodox enjoying more trust because we have majority of supporters of Russian Orthodox compared to Catholics. So therefore, it's quite a unique phenomenon. I mean, the figures that we see. Here you may look at the conclusions that we are summing up, say that we have been analyzing this part of the survey. I have been mentioning these issues already. We would switch to other slides because we don't have much time to waste. Now you have comparison between attitudes to different countries. Here you see Belarusians traditionally perceive Russia, as well as other countries in the world, probably more except would be United States of America, which have less people considering or treating United States well. A large group is noticed who say difficult to say. Anyway, the figure looks quite good, so it's difficult to say that in Belarusian society that we have Americaphobia for this. People are against Americans. In which geopolitical union Belarusian would find it better, Belarusian state? Well, again, in Belarusian society, there is a request, there is a need that Belarus would have or should have union, or very close relations together with the Russian Federation and the European Union. As well as a good number of people would be supporting of no membership in any geopolitical unions. So that means Belarus should be closely approximated and closely far from Russia and from the European Union. It's quite necessary to understand the 32% of people who say the union with Russia. At a later stage, we may discuss who are these people, because we would be showing different segments, referring to different segments, showing as an example. And in Russia, they decided to say that, openly saying, they would like to see the union with European Union countries. That means 13% in July 2021. We also asked question, what kind of union with Russia is more acceptable to the respondent? So all Belarusians say that good economic relations with Russia, because majority of Belarusians see the future relations with Russia. There is a group of people who perceive different approach, so they want Belarus much closer to Russia. Say we need common economic space with unified external policy and army, 9%, and then 11% and 9%, they would like to become part of Russia, 9% of people. It's also quite a significant figure. Then we have been asking question, attitude to President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. So no significant change have been noticed during the last month. 57% perceive Putin well, and 27% have negative attitude. Again, 30% say the attitude is worsening to Mr. Putin, but it happens because the people who support protest movement have been disappointed with policy and strategy of the Russian Federation towards Belarusian regime in terms of the existing Russian authorities' power is supporting those in power in Belarus. As well, we have been asking question about the neutrality of Belarus, so that unified treaty in terms of politics, the society should discuss. There's this idea, Vladimir Makey has been expressing it, and Alexander Lukashenko supported it. So a lot of Belarusian officials, so Belarus has to abandon the idea about the neutrality in constitution. And this kind of question was raised, whether Belarus should be negate its strive to neutrality. So the 63% say they should keep the membership in the collective security treaty. From the other hand, we see that a similar question, but the wording was different. But it's one and the same. Belarus, whether Belarus should be kept or stay in this security treaty organization. Belarus should keep membership in the collective security treaty. So to what extent Belarus should be neutral? As well, we were asking question about placement of the Russian Air Force base in Belarus. Because in Grodno there are activities underway. So the training center, including the Air Force. So, and we wanted to know attitude of people about the increase of the Russian presence in Belarus. We noticed that indeed people perceive it negatively. 17% stated that they find it difficult to say. 19% say they are indifferent. Only 25% of urban citizens approve this idea. Again, you could see conclusions. I've already mentioned, I've already voiced them. So you make a screenshot so that double check or read it carefully, because indeed this presentation would be published only next week. Public opinion, now we would ask a question in the context of the yesterday's phenomenon. So the Belarusians will feel secure or insecure. So this feeling in late July, early August, 39% say that they do not feel secure. So quite a small figure. So that means in Belarusian society, there's a feeling of own insecurity in own country. However, compared to the previous research, so the April, for example, so this figure has grown a little bit, and it is related to the fact that there's a trend to have an increase to apathy and probably return to a kind of normality in a different situation, but it's a new reality to Belarusian society, I would say. But there is a request, there is a need to return. There used to be. Now we see that in the nearest future, Belarus would face a serious economic crisis. Majority share this point of view. Again, compared to the previous polling, the number of people have gone down. If we speak about coronavirus, 5% say they're successfully coping, the country successfully copes. We need to understand This data was prepared in July, when the number of cases was quite low. Now we are making a new wave of research. So to find out whether Belarusians consider, for example, say in September, in October, to what extent the figure undergone changes. Now we move on. So we would be asking whether secure or
наименее люди чувствуют себя в безопасности в Минске, а наиболее они чувствуют
depending
себя...
on the type of the locations. The smaller cities, secure, they feel in small towns and small cities.
Большое количество утверждений.
As well, we were asking a number of questions, number of statements that people agree or disagree. Again, I would suggest you make a screenshot, and then you notice the changes that has happened. For example, number of people. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has lost battle with Lukashenko. Unfortunately, Belarusian society, in relation to attitude to Lukashenko, to dialogue with Lukashenko, didn't undergo any changes. 2/3 believe that the existing power should start negotiations with those who disagree with the results of elections. So prisoners related to protests and elections should be freed. Tikhanovsky does not deserve to be in jail. So not a lot of people consider or believe that the accusations of Babarika are fair. So the figure is less than those who are supporting the country regime. What is your attitude to action of protests against the authorities? You could see that the figure is quite stable, or remains stable at least. You could see that 39% say or evidences that they have positive attitude to protest, and they didn't undergo significant changes. Quite a large group of people who find it difficult to answer this question. So we need to understand that people find it difficult because whether their attitude to protest is good or bad, because they have different perception or different understanding of the requirements and demands of those who go to protest. Because they say they're against, for example, because they believe that protest is not going to be successful and probably will result in negative consequences to the Belarusian society and people. So therefore, there's a great deal of problem whether new protest actions should be organized and carried out. Again, if you look at what has been taking place, and you see the right slide, in Belarus, people, 2/3 say that the new honest elections should be conducted. A decent, appropriate investigation of facts of violence on the part of the law enforcement bodies should be conducted. People should be freed. There shouldn't be force used against the protesters. Then a question was raised, which people find quite important. We found quite important. So the protest movement, they do not speak about positive agenda. So they make a focus. We ask a question whether people are aware that the European Union developed an economic plan that envisages allocation of quite significant amount of funds, approximately $10 billion in total. So in mass media was mentioned $10 million, but it should be euro rather than dollars, because we have been using the mass media figure. Not much of Belarusians are aware of this, but almost 24%. I mean, urban citizens, 24% are aware of the system. And mostly these are the people who are the adherents to the protest movement, whereas 76% do not know. Hear this, whether you agree or disagree with the following statements about this plan. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because we have a lot of slides to deal with, approximately 40 plus slides to cover.
Существует подобный план, соответственно, эти цифры происходят именно от того, что мы спрашивали только у этой четверти белорусов.
And it's important that exactly we were asking about 26% of people. So this, we were asking question whether you have friends and you have relatives, events, recent events. To what extent you are...
Группа 16%, которые говорят о том, что да, они, у них есть друзья, и они обсуждали. И мы спросили о том, кто являются эти люди, представители силовых структур. Я хотел бы... И тут самое важное, что мы можем увидеть из этого слайда.
Use this slide. So indeed, Belarusian law enforcement bodies, they are not united in order to support Alexander Lukashenko. So we noticed a group of people that among the law enforcement bodies, they have not been voting for Lukashenko. They also mentioned that some of them would like to terminate their service or terminate their employment with law enforcement bodies. Among those, there are quite a lot of people who agree with actions of the law enforcement bodies when suppressing the protest actions, but they have a different perception of the surrounding world. The state symbols, the question was, to a certain extent, it's stable or remained stable. 29% of citizens, they say, have closer the white, red and white and Pahonia emblem, whereas 23% say they're close to existing symbols, and then say 23 say none of these. So in Belarus society, there's quite a large group that green and red flag is not the flag that were police trucks were covered with, or where to a certain extent it doesn't depend on them whether this flag is used or not. So really, attitude to sanctions, different actions of foreign countries. Almost 1/3 states they approve. 20% find it difficult to answer. When we speak about limited sanctions, pointed sanctions, Belarusians are positive. Only 1/3 says again, they are against. We have been measuring to what extent the Belarusians have desire to leave the country and to move to another country. So a lot of people would like to leave. 39%. 1.5 years was only 29%. So it's April, May 2020. So we have noticed the 10% growth. At the same time, what is important, indeed, the people that would like to leave the country and move to other country, not necessarily they are thinking how they're going to move, because they're not always put together, preparing the documents, to take firm decision to leave. So they're simply thinking about the idea, but they're not implementing the idea in real life. But to show the extent of possible people that are going to leave Belarus, for possible migration, so about 43% say they have relatives or they have friends who left the country and moved to another country to live. So that means immigration percentage is quite high. We cannot be sure about the statistical support to our figures because we don't have statistical figures. A lot of stuff is published about migration services. But in Belarus and Ukraine, mostly these are the countries that are most popular for Belarusians to live. But it's difficult to say whether people are using the regular visa. As well, we have been asking questions about the sources of information. So what Belarusians read, what Belarusians watch, say state television, plus Tudbay. As
Мы
well,
задавали вопросы, которые какие
important media and well-known media were referred to. What are the most important resources for you? Then, recent time, Belarusians were mentioning that Tudbay was the most important. Probably we would be measuring repeatedly in October to find out whether the followers of Tudbay went to Mirror, Zerkala, what kind of changes took place from this time until today. And basically, Tudbay is a leader, quite evident, quite popular. On top, there is also ONT, public television, state television, that people find, for example, 9%, they say, a very important source of information. Again, 16% find Yandex as an important source of information, which is Russian-controlled media. So that means a segment which is very important for understanding of where information is received by Belarusians. This was the question that we were asking. So Tudbay was the most important for you. So please tell us, after it was closed, so where did you move? Where do you get public and political information from? So the more neutral, online, for example, Yandex, but we noted that part of the people moved to media which are openly saying that they support protest movement. They judge negatively the attitude and actions of the, so for example, Belsat and Radio Liberty were of those most popular. You could see the results and the conclusions. So make a screenshot and make use of it. So we'll move further. We have been making a segmentation of Belarusian society into three. We have three segments. So urban citizens in Belarus at present,
6% это нейтралы, которые составляют
nucleus of the protest, core of the protest, neutrals, and then supporters of Lukashenko. So we have been doing this based on the mathematical measurement, as our respondents whether have been showing agreement or disagreement with statements. So you could see here on this particular, whether people agree that results of selections were falsified, whether you support protests, whether you're adherent of the current regime, what are the attitude to suppression of the violence, so whether the country moves in the right or wrong direction.
Покажу, как вот эти вопросы, которые вы уже видели, как они раскладываются между...
How these questions that you've been looked at, how this is distinguished by Belarusian society. For example, the nucleus of the protest, core of the protest,
как бастион Лукашенко за красный
цвет. Say they're supporting red and white, whereas Lukashenko support green and red.
Красно-зеленый флаг.
Neutrals would support red and green, and this is a reason why red and green gains over the white, red and white. In our research as well, in our survey as well, of which of these people, the most, the person is deserves most of all become president of Belarus. Quite evident from supporters of Lukashenko, 82% say he is.
Являются ядром протеста, они
who support the nucleus, which are the nucleus of the process, they're consolidated. Around some leader, for example, Viktor Babariko gained 42% of those from nucleus of the considerable protests, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and Pavel Latushko. You could see that these are voters are less grouped or less coordinated. Index of trust. It's quite evident that people which are supporters of Lukashenko, or say trust representatives of the current regime, and from the other hand, similar situation was drawn or similar comparison was made in case or in relation to those people who support the protest. Probably more important is to look at, so I just made one slide back, what is the attitude of the neutral people, so that's the medium of the society. So those who support the neutrals more or less treat Sergei Rum properly, or when we speak about people who support the protest, we see that a good rating was obtained by Viktor Babarika among the neutrals, but Maxim Bogatsov, these are not very well-known politicians, because in absolute figures, we don't have much people who know them and who support them. So when we think about Viktor Babarika, he's well-known, but he got a quite considerable rating about the neutrals. As well, there are a number of other people who have similar appropriate attitude on the part of neutrals. For example, Andrei Dmitriev, and of course Pavel Latushko. Then we were asking people from different segments of the society how they treat different countries. Probably the most important, the most evident, I would say, is the process. We, as researchers, have been mentioning very often that people who support the protest movement, they change their attitude to the Russian Federation. They're their attitude to the Russian Federation is worsening. So more they treat well, better the Western countries. When we speak about supporters of Lukashenko, so attitude to the West is worsening, and so their attitude to the Russian Federation is improving. Now we see the difference between the groups in relation to geopolitical unions. We see that nucleus of the protest, we have growth of those who say we should strive to the European Union membership. When we speak about supporters of Lukashenko, union with Russia. As well, the 43% who say within the nucleus of the protest, supporting the union with Russia and EU at the same time.
Даже среди бастиона Лукашенко есть 20%, которые говорят про союз с Россией ЕС одновременно, 13%, которые говорят о том, что лучше быть. И, наверное, эта вот идея...
with Russia and EU, and 13% say no union is needed. So it's so equal approximation to Russia and EU. So this idea could have united the political spectrum among the elite. About those who take decision in Belarus, so from opposite sides of the fight, and this could have united Belarusian society. So this is the attitude, how different groups perceive or treat option of the union with Russia, to how close we should be to Russia. For example, we could see here that the nucleus of the protest, or the core of the protest, say free economic zone or common economic space without political amalgamation. As when supporters of Lukashenko say, we need to get integrated further with Russia. Slide 46. Anton, we are about to finish in 20 minutes, or could we stay more? Okay, let's stay a little bit more. If more, very good. We will end up in the evening. Next question is about the treaty about the collective security. CSTO. Supporters of Lukashenko for the collective security treaty, whereas people who support the protest, we should leave the collective security treaty organization and be neutral. As well, we speak about how the neutrals behave. Part of the, they say majority, they say we should keep the membership in the collective security treaty organization. Others, we should leave, 40%. Here we see the split between the different groups. About the four statements, quite natural that supporters of Lukashenko feel safe in Belarus. They do not expect crisis. They believe that Belarus is doing well in terms of combating the pandemic of coronavirus, but only 30% say that their material position, material status has improved during the last months. Also, we have been polling people to what extent they agree with the following statements. Agree or disagree? Here we need to refer to a couple of figures only. Even if Lukashenko is among the people who support him, even in this group, there are 23% who say, supporters of Lukashenko, that authorities should start negotiations with those who disagree with elections results. Even within Lukashenko, there's 22% say they disagree with what is going in the country. So this group, as we could note it, I mean, supporters of Lukashenko, not to that extent they are homogeneous in their attitude and their perception of what is going on in the country. Here, the important slide for understanding the protest, to a certain extent, has the group of people who look in a different way, even in the core of the protest, that sanctions to Belarusian enterprises are intolerable, are unacceptable, so that 18% against. I would be accelerating, I will be moving faster. It's the attitude to actions of protest against the authorities. The co-nucleus definitely supporting, supporters against. It is important to see that neutrals find it difficult to answer this question to what is the attitude to the protest. If we look at the second part of the slide, most likely in their majority, they support the demands and requirements of the protesters. So they believe that the new and fair elections should be conducted, violence should be investigated, Lukashenko should go. So the even neutral part of the society, they act for political changes. So not necessarily it's only the core of the protest, or those neutral who would not like to see any changes. So indeed, they find it necessary that Belarus takes these changes, or has these changes, and it unites them with the supporters of the protest. So leaving the country, the desire to immigrate. So immigration idea is supported about 90% of the core of the protest. So neutrals are less careful about it, and of course not the supporters of Lukashenko. What kind of media you collect the information or use the information? I will come back to the next slides. We have been making kind of mini survey within the survey. As you could see, the huge amount of material, so I apologize for probably delaying with completion of my presentation. A different attitude to different problems and issues the Belarus is faced with. Economic issues, price rise, low pay, low pensions. These social problems exist in Belarusian society, even if the authorities try to present that things are stabilized, have been improved. Economically speaking, Belarusians feel that the situation is not that nice or that good. And in Belarus, there's a kind of boom of export. So the economy seems to be growing. This is not a kind of good piece of news for the supporters, for the whole society in general, because social problems are very important. People complain about the abuse on the powers of militia or police, law enforcement bodies. So these political issues are also of importance. We split about the groups: nucleus of the protest, neutrals, supporters of Lukashenko. So all these issues and questions that society is faced with. And we see that, generally speaking, the nucleus of the protest, the core of the protest, are more concerned about delay of the economic development rates, say unfairness of courts, poor quality of medical services, so they refer to this kind of issues. If we look from the other side, then supporters of Lukashenko complain about poor pay or low pay, about sanctions. 42% speak about sanctions. Neutrals say that in between, they complain about economic issues as well as political problems. So these are the questions that have been already voiced, and then what kind of problems you might be touched with or faced with in the future. You see that economic problems prevail because Belarusian society is faced with, generally speaking, so they used to exist, but not to that extent. But Belarusians have always been complaining that indeed, economic of Belarus, not always, but a lot was mentioned a lot of times, that Belarusian economy is not that booming as it is presented by state media. But as we are aware, Belarusians do not trust state-controlled media very well. As well, we were asking about whether gender equality or inequality in terms of labor pay between males and females in Belarus. Mostly, it is mentioned about the nucleus of the protest, whereas neutrals and then supporters of Lukashenko are not paying more attention. So neutrals are in between. As well, we were asking a question because Alexander Lukashenko once stated that Belarusians should not vote for the female during presidential elections. What kind of split this kind of statement could have made on Belarusians? So whether this opinion is shared by the supporters of Lukashenko. But again, this opinion is only supported by 37% of them. It's not majority. Abortions. In abortions, the Belarus is a liberal country. So these are the conclusions. But again, you make a screenshot so that to save our time, echo chambers of the Belarusian society. It's kind of a mini survey within a survey. So what is going on in the society? We ask a question, whether you are a supporter of the current regime. And then we have been asking these people to evaluate how many people share their point of view. And so those who are supporters of the current regime, so they are all, say, overestimating almost 2 times the number of their supporters, the number of their adherents, so that not adequately perceiving the real situation. Adherents of the protest, they are not supporters of the current regime, but again, they're also a little bit overestimating their representation in Belarusian society. But generally speaking, the difference is of 10%. 61% they do not support of the current regime, whereas 71% they are those like them, they have 71% of the society. We ask a question whether our respondents support whether Svetlana Tikhanovskaya received about 50% of votes. And then I've been clarifying the question whether Svetlana Tikhanovskaya collected 50, much more, or much less. And we noted that 49% believe that they gained much more. Because they feel that very few people have voted in a different way because relatives, colleagues, friends have been voting for her. So if it were not for mass support of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, protest would have been not that massive. A lot of observers confirmed that there were appropriately bent bulletins. So therefore, they believe that Svetlana Tikhanovskaya gained more than 50%. 30% of urban citizens believe that Svetlana gained much less.
менее рациональные,
the
чем
answers that we have received are less rational than in the case of
да, то есть мы видим то, что
with people who believe that Tikhanovsky, who believe that she gained much less. So how
не все голосовали против Тихановской. То есть мы видим, тут есть какой-то определенный аргументация, например,
against Lukashenko, but we of voters. So we have moved further. We have been asking what kind of sources of information they found most important. Adherents of the current regime and adherents of the supporters of the protest. So we noted that they use information differs considerably. Adherents of the authorities, they say state-controlled television, ONT, BT, whereas supporters of the protest, they speak about Tutbay, Belsat, and other media. It's important to understand we have been doing this in late July, early August, and we would need better to understand how Zerkala is functioning, what kind of group of people it unites, what kind of value, whether this value remained, because Tutbay was perceived as a neutral fora, and people were reading it, including adherents of the authorities of the regime. It's clear to understand, but what we have shown in our survey is these groups, adherents and supporters of the regime, and those, so they receive information from different sources. And so therefore they make use of this information. And of course, this kind of a long-term problem for Belarusian society, how to find the way out of the crisis, because people perceive the world around them differently. So I've been speaking about 50 minutes. I apologize that I've taken a lot of your time, so that at least you were able to have a cup of coffee or a glass of water. I was unable, but this kind of compensation for the time that was a little bit delayed. I would be pleased to answer questions to what extent the press club gives me opportunity. So I'm open to questions. Go ahead. Thank you, Rigor. Indeed, the presentation was comprehensive. Colleagues, if you have questions, so probably the right time, raise your hand or ask questions via chat. We do have a number of comments from YouTube that we are streaming of what is going on there. One of the comments is, Ishtanbrey did not understand why Olga Karach is marked with red. Probably a kind of mistake on Olga Karach. I apologize. In the English presentation, it was corrected, adjusted. So I apologize. I would do so in the Russian version. Now, another comment from YouTube, Oleh Sobolevsky. We see that total blocking of the independent media, Euronews and other measures like this influence the society.
Да,
yes.
Я думаю, что это правдивый тезис.
Yes, I agree. It's true, because this is exactly the authorities act in a way, they treat independent media, it works.
Сейчас мы видим,
the problem is,
что люди не хотят, например, VPN, да.
People do not want to set up VPN, which is not that difficult, but it's not. So, for example, those who've been reading Tutbay, so they did not switch to Zerkala, Mirror, because they don't want to install VPN, virtual phone number. So these measures certainly have been influencing. So therefore, people switch to mass media who are open, plus Russian media, of course. Yandex is also available. As we see, the Komsomolskaya Pravda. So Komsomolskaya Pravda today, but kind of different story. Well, indeed, the same kind of story. I don't have to hide. Well, colleagues, do we have questions? If there are no questions, oh yes.
Павел Слюнкин.
Павел Слюнкин.
И наиболее достоин быть президентом.
Say deserves most to become president. Lukashenko gained approximately same number of answers. So that means voters of Alexander Lukashenko have been absolutely consolidated. They don't see other options. When we ask this type of question, let me open my presentation again. So to understand what Pavel is speaking about, we will come back to the beginning of the presentation. However, in general, I apologize. Now,
мы тут. Что мы видим? Мы задаем
what we see. So these are two different questions. Select of those who deserve to become the president. Three options. Now we are clarifying the question. Of those three, who deserves most to become the president? What we see, those who select Lukashenko, in the clarification question, they select Lukashenko because they don't see any other alternative. Because I say again, voters of Lukashenko are consolidated to the maximum extent possible. Those who support democratic representatives or representatives of the democratic movement, they have different perceptions. So if Viktor Babariko is selected, 33%, then is of the list of three, they may give preference to somebody else. For example, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. So this voters are less consolidated in this respect. Well, probably it's not a big issue. So that Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and Latushko have received their own ratings. I see one more hand raised. Yulia, please, the floor is yours. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you well. Thank you for the interesting presentation. I have two questions. The first that you voiced already, but you didn't answer about the growth of those who are not sure, who do not trust. And second question is, seem to be very interesting, the presentation from the in relation to neutrally. There's a bog, but it's not a bog because they have political preferences, they have the desire, the intention about democratic changes, but anti-rating of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya was surprising, -21. But the same Pozniak, if I have been making the note in the right way, how could you explain it? Well, thank you for the two interesting questions about the growth of people who are not sure. We see this in relation to Alexander Lukashenko. The same is applicable to cases to state authorities, state institutions. From wave to wave, we see the increase of number of those who find it difficult about their trust or no trust to Belarusian state institutions. Similar situation on independent sector. But what is important to understand here, people find it boring to concentrate on politics. They experience feeling that they need to move on, and they find an opportunity. So, for example, sometimes they find it easier to answer that they don't have an opinion and they don't know what it may result in. So they see, for example, Alexander Lukashenko is bad. It's not quite clear. So therefore, people say, well, we do not bother very much about Lukashenko. That's it. So therefore they say, I find it difficult to answer. So probably it's a kind of reason so that people would like to come back to normal life, because part of the people have returned to certain normal. So mass actions of protest last year, so they were conducted in large regional center. At first, regional towns in Minsk, but in small cities, we have been. So they have been suppressed very quickly in small towns, and people seem to come back to their everyday life, at least the way perceive it, because actions for them were aware from the Telegram channels and from the state media, depending on the source of information they get information from. But in the streets, they have noticed the picture, which seems to be quite stable for the authorities. So they are not supporters of the current regime, but they find it difficult to give answer. What is the attitude? What is their attitude to the authorities, to the regime? In relation to rating of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, it's very important that Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, a lot of resources was spent against, especially propaganda was against her. And it's the adherents of the regime treat her very negatively. Part of the neutrals as well also support the negative attitude to Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. So that the propaganda machine has their own task, has their own objectives, but they cannot change the course of history, and they cannot influence the society, because the person is leading in anti-rating is Alexander Lukashenko, of course.